This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Con Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Con, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Only the Strong Survive. I am Dan Con, and I am really excited for today's episode. I've had this guest on my list since we started the show over a year ago. I was honestly hoping he would agree to come on, and we've had some great conversations. And because he is local to Ventura County, he's actually agreed to come in and do this one in person. So if you are in Southern California and you have ever gone to a pumpkin patch, if you've ever had a kid who's gone to farm camp, you probably know the name Underwood Family Farms. Underwood Family Farms is kind of a legendary organization and farm out here in Ventura County. And I have its founder, Craig Underwood, joining us here today to talk about his business, talk about farming. If you're interested in sriracha or have ever put some on your food, we're going to get into that. And that's a fascinating story. So I'm really excited to learn about a tough, very important business, which is how food makes it to your table and how someone can grow a business that's rooted in community and sustainability and agriculture. So Craig, thank you so much for coming out today and joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So let's start with the basics. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what your companies are?
I'm Craig Underwood, and I started farming with my dad in 1968. I went to Cornell University, spent 3.5 years in the Navy, and then returned to the farm. And I was married to Sarah Jane in 1967. We bought a house right away, and we lived in the same house ever since. And in 1980, I started a produce stand in Somas, and that evolved into Underwood Family Farms. And Underwood Ranches was the umbrella company. Today, Underwood Ranches farms about 3,000 acres, Ventura and Kern County, and Underwood Family Farms farms about 200 acres.
And explain what do the two businesses do? So what's ranches and what's farms, for those who don't know the brand?
Underwood Ranches is kind of the umbrella organization that's existed for, my lifetime and my dad's, and before that, not under the same name. We grow all kinds of fruits and vegetables and have over the years. We're currently not growing any fresh produce anymore. It's all about growing contract crops. We grow cannery tomatoes, potatoes, onions, carrots, just commodity type produce for other companies. We do it under contract. There's a story behind how we got into that. Family Farms started in 1980 with a produce stand and evolved over time to the point where in 1994, we started renting in Moorpark some land from the Brecquenier family, Rick and Linnea. That business evolved into what it is today, where we sell directly to the customer, both through farmers markets, people who come to pick their own, the two produce stands. If we have extra, we'll wholesale it, but we prefer to sell direct. We have lots of events out there.
And for those who aren't local, San Fernando Valley, Ventura County area, Underwood is a pretty special place. I've been to several weddings at your property, like you and I were talking about before the show started. My kids have gone to farm camp at your farm many years in a row, going back a long time, and it's a huge part of their childhood. Like you said, a lot of the farmers markets you guys go to, you sell fresh produce. It's a pretty neat thing that you've built out there. Ranches, it sounds like, is a more traditional agriculture business. Farms is almost like the pumpkin patch every fall. You guys have train rides and hay rides, and you're kind of in the entertainment business almost with Family Farms. How did that evolve? Was that something you just kept adding stuff every year, or was there like a master plan?
No, it wasn't a master plan. I think mostly we were responding to what people wanted. The tours, which is a big part of what we do now, school tours, started with Underwood Ranches, just giving tours. We were at the time producing baby lettuces for salads, and there was a school down in Malibu that'd like to come up and visit. So we just did that. Well, that carried on, and pretty soon school tours became a big part of our business. So I would say mostly it evolved. Somewhere back in the late 90s, we started participating in an organization called North American Farmers Direct Marketing Association. And that's farmers all over the country who do what's now called ag entertainment. And ag entertainment typically involves, certainly October is a big event, Christmas, springtime events. More recently, we've added things like flowers with tulips and lavender. It's anything that we can do on the farm that is farm oriented, because it's my personal philosophy to keep it farm oriented, where some farms have become more, I would say, amusement parks where there's very little farming left.
Right.
But hey, if that works for them, fine. Doesn't work for me.
Well, one of the things I have found that as someone who's kind of lived in a suburban type normal neighborhood my whole life, what I've learned with my own family and my kids is going to your U-Pick events and going out there and just picking strawberries or, picking tomatoes and going to the blueberry farm and doing the same thing. First of all, the kids love it. They think it's super fun. I think it's an interesting opportunity for kids to learn where the food comes from on the table. And I'm not sure that a lot of people think about that very much. And I'm curious, have you seen over the last, it sounds like you've been farming for about 50 or 60 years now. Have you seen a shift? Like, are people thinking more about where their food comes from? And are they more interested in all that? Or is it, how have perceptions changed from the customer and the consumer over the years?
I think we are educating people. Certainly, it's kind of a cliche that kids think their food comes from the supermarket, but it's true. They think, the carrots, they can just pull them off the shelf. They don't realize they can come from Mexico, from China. They can come from any place. And they may not necessarily eat vegetables, but if they pick them, there's a pretty good chance they're going to eat them. So we feel like we're educating the children and their parents because we get a lot of questions about how we farm, whether we're organic, whether we're GMO or non-GMO, all of the kind of buzzwords that people have these days. And it gives us a chance, if they're interested, to talk about it. And certainly on our tours, the tour leaders will explain as much as they can to the kids. And we always have a classroom experience offered. So they come into the classroom and they'll talk about fruits and vegetables. So as long as we keep the kids' attention, they can learn.
Boy, is that true. And since we've been coming to you guys, my youngest, my son, has shown huge interest in growing his own fruits and vegetables. So we actually tore out half our lawn in our little backyard and put a bunch of garden boxes in. And this kid only eats cheeseburgers and like plain pasta. But you are absolutely right. Any vegetable that comes out of his garden, he'll eat. So for us, it's a huge motivator to put in the work because at least he's eating a little healthier. So I think that's a really good point.
We like to look at it as we're building customers into the future. Because if we can start the kids eating vegetables when they're young, hopefully as they become adults, they will continue to do that and they'll be our customer.
As a businessman, that's smart. I also think it's probably a healthy way to go. I'm curious, Craig, you've been farming a long time. How have you seen the business change of just being a independent, you're not part of some big corporate enterprise. I don't think you've got a big private equity overlord somewhere. It's family business. How has that changed over the decades?
It changes so much every year. I kind of lose track of the big changes along the way. But when I look back to when I first started farming with my dad, it's a huge change. Farming has gotten a lot more difficult. There's a lot more regulation. We have food safety regulations we have to follow and labor standards and on and on and on. And all those regulations cost us a lot of money, but we don't necessarily get paid for them. It's just part of what we have to do. Plus, people expect food to be cheap. If the price of a head of lettuce goes up 25 cents in the store, they notice it. They comment about it. Whereas if they haven't experienced at the farm, they're not quite as sensitive to price increases. I would say the margins are a lot slimmer today than they used to be. Didn't used to seem to be as hard to make money as it is now, but we've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations on the farm. I can think of 3 or 4 different times when I was worried about going out of business.
Well, and you're also, unlike a lot of the business owners we talk to, you're not only dealing with kind of employees and prices and margins and all the normal stuff, you're also dealing with things like weather and stuff that most businesses don't really have to think about. So how many employees do you have across the whole organization?
Underwood Ranches has about 100 employees, and Underwood Family Farms varies from about 50 to 150. We have quite a few temporary employees and seasonal employees for the festivals. We love to hire young people to come. We view it as an opportunity to train them, and they help us out. And we want to have a nice, friendly, inviting atmosphere. But your comment about the weather, this last summer was a hot summer in the valley. Not so much on the coast, but in the valley. And we had a period when it was 115 degrees for 2 or 3 weeks straight. And we grow potatoes over there, and for the first time ever, the potatoes cooked in the ground. So they ended up going for hog feed.
So I'm sure it's pennies on the dollar for something like that, right?
And nothing we pay to get rid of them.
Oh, wow. What do you do, I guess? Just gut through it and hope it gets better next year?
I guess we get used to it.
Wow. And one thing I also want to ask about is, and I don't know if this is just my perception or if it's true, it seems like over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, the farmer's market thing has become a much bigger deal where there seems like there's more of them and more people going. Is that something that you guys have taken advantage of and that you've seen as well, or the customer wants to meet the farmer and actually buy direct rather than going through a supermarket?
It is. And we started farmers markets going to, I think it was 1997 or 95, somewhere in there. My wife opened the Camarillo Farmers Market back in that period. And she worked there for 14 years. Rain, shine, it didn't matter. She was always out there. And now we go to 15 different farmers markets. They've become oversaturated in some markets. Market managers want to keep opening new markets, and that just cuts into the business of old markets. So we have to be pretty selective about where we go because it's hard to recruit farmers market employees. Saturday and Sunday, the busiest days. The crew meets at the farm at 4 a.m. every Saturday and Sunday. And getting consistent employees to do that is really a challenge. They tend to work overtime. It's physical work, it's mental work, but it's good.
I would imagine it's a good way to also get your name out into the community too.
It is.
And so that's pretty cool. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is sort of unique and something I've followed along just because I'm a local, but I think our listeners around the country will find this interesting, is tell us about the hot sauce business, because I know that's been an interesting saga that I've been following locally. So you've had a pretty significant role in the kind of birth, growth, and future of sriracha in America. So can you tell me how that got started and let's talk about that a little bit.
It is an interesting story because sriracha has become what I would say is the new American condiment. We started growing for Huy Fong Foods back in 1988 when I wrote David Tran a letter and I said, can we grow peppers for you? Because at the time he was buying a good chunk of his peppers off the LA market. He would get surplus red peppers. So that first year we planted 50 acres.
And just to pause for a second for background. So Huy Fong was really kind of the first company to introduce sriracha, right? So to anyone listening, the red bottle with the rooster and the green cap, the kind of the original, and we're going to get into this later, but the one that you probably have had a hard time finding lately. So that was early days for them, I assume, right?
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Okay, so you approached him.
I mean, I'll give David credit. Later on, I'll talk about the part that I don't give him credit for, but I'll give him credit because he made the sauce, loaded up his van, and delivered door to door from, here up to San Francisco. What he was doing differently than all other hot sauces was it was 90% red jalapeno peppers. Most others have a lot of water, vinegar, a lot of other things mixed in. Basically, it was a new product. We grew with Huy Fong Foods.
So 50 acres was the first season.
Yes.
That's a lot of land. How did that scale over time? Where at your peak, where did you end up?
We grew peppers for Huy Fong Foods for 28 years. It went from 50 acres to end of our relationship. We were growing 2,000 acres. And our best year for Huy Fong, we delivered 100 million pounds. We were delivering 50 truck and trailer loads of red jalapenos every single day for 10 weeks. It was all mechanically harvested. We developed the system for mechanical harvesting, the machines, built the machines, modified them to make them work. When we were hand picking, our biggest acreage for hand picking was, I think, 450 acres. And we had over 600 people hand picking. It was a nightmare. When you have 600 people, that's like a whole city out there. When we were growing 2,000 acres, it was basically 120 people sorting, and it was mostly sorting because the machines did all the harvesting.
That is a huge amount of peppers.
It is.
So I assume once you really got up and running, you were the majority of the peppers they were running or all of them?
We were all of them.
And then I guess because it's a seasonal crop, how does that work? So you said for a few weeks there, you're delivering this massive quantity of red peppers every day. They'd go to their factory and I guess do they put them in cold storage or do they just make a whole year's worth in one kind of batch and then?
They put them in barrels, same way we do. The mash, when it's ground up and you mix in, you have to bring the pH quite low so that it preserves the mash. It'll last for years. David built a brand new facility in Irwindale while we were growing for him, and it was 600,000 square feet. He ran into some issues with the city of Irwindale.
I remember that because the community got kind of fired up because I think
they did.
He built a new factory, and I guess the neighbors didn't like their eyes burning in the morning. And I remember that was in the news locally for a while that there were some issues.
It was a huge issue, and we went down and supported David at the city council meeting. We did a lot to support him. We suggested some ways where he could reduce the odor, but he did not admit that there was an odor. Eventually, the state intervened because they had provided money for the city of Irwindale to be able to offer this at the land for an inexpensive price to David. So the issue went away at the time, but the publicity that generated was worldwide. Friends of ours were on a cruise in Australia and heard about it.
Oh, wow. So what happened after that? When did things start to kind of change?
They changed suddenly in 2016. The year before, there was some indication when David made an attempt to hire Jim Roberts, who developed the machinery, the system, managed Underwood Ranches.
So he's your guy.
He is. Jim is what you would call our chief operating officer. So David made an attempt to hire him in 2015, secretly, behind my back.
That probably didn't feel very good.
No, we didn't know quite how to handle that because he was 80 to 90% of our business. Didn't totally ignore it, but we didn't react by protecting ourselves that maybe the way we should have. Because a year later, after our best season ever, delivering product, and we sat down the end of October and agreed on the next season. We were going to grow another 1,700 acres for him at the time. As we had been doing, our family going to Hawaii in November, we left for Hawaii. And 4 days into our trip, I got a call from Jim and said that David had called him down to the factory, said, "You're going to come to work for me. I'm no longer going to grow all my peppers with Underwood Ranches. And whatever I do is going to be at a much lower price." Jim turned him down. That led to an effort by us to try and figure out what the hell was going on, because we didn't really, I guess we should have recognized something was happening, but we didn't react to it. So for the next month or 2 months, we tried to see if we could put something together, and it was impossible. So we separated, and all of a sudden we had, at that time, 4,000 acres, which we had nothing to grow on, nothing profitable.
So he waited until the harvest, got all the peppers from that season.
Yes.
And then pulled the rug out.
Yes. And at the time, and that came out in court documents, he had 15 months of inventory. So he figured he could do this. He didn't really need us anymore. He decided he could get peppers cheaper from Mexico. I think he wanted our side of the business because he recognized how important it was. As he's found out since then, though he probably wouldn't admit it, our production of the red jalapenos was what made the sauce, because it was 90% of the product.
Yeah.
And we tested all of the varieties. We knew all the varieties. We had the planning system, basically guaranteed that he was going to have sufficient supply. He admitted at one point that the supply side was the key part of his business.
So you're in Hawaii on your family vacation. The harvest is over.
Yep.
You're taking a little break. The commercial kind of ranch farming business has had its big harvest. You're kind of in the lull between that, and I assume Family Farms gets fired up for Halloween and New Year and Christmas and all that stuff. And you get this call. Now, you didn't have a written contract. So
Right.
What goes through your mind when you get that call after 30 years?
I guess I didn't look at the ultimate consequence, even though I knew it had the potential to bankrupt us. For the initial month or two, we were just focusing on trying to get something done. We had already started preparing for the next season, because you can't just, wait till November to start preparing. You have to order seed, you have to prepare the ground. So we were already underway. We were already working on the equipment.
My compliments to you for building a company culture so strong that Jim has stuck with you through all this. That's a real testament to you, I think. And that's cool that he was loyal to you. That's, I think, rare. And that, I think, is a compliment to you as much as it is to him.
Yeah, I would say, in the cowboy culture, they would call that riding for the brand.
Yeah.
And Jim truly does. Frankly, the next few years were so difficult that, I have to give a lot of credit to all of the people that worked for us. There were no more bonuses for that time period. And every week we were worried that the end of that week, could we make payroll?
Been there. Yeah, not at that scale, but I've been there, and it's scary. Did you come back from Hawaii and try and sit down with David and save the deal? Did you try and figure out what the heck happened, or was it clear the door was closed?
We kept communicating with David, and we would think we had an agreement to go ahead under a different arrangement. That would be on a Friday. Then on Monday, it'd get canceled. And we communicated through Donna, who's his communication to the outside world. Because David can be hard to understand. His English is difficult to understand. Donna operated very well in both cultures. So we were communicating with Donna, and it was a weird time. It's a little hard to reconstruct it in my mind, but it was weird.
So did you go ahead and keep prepping the land and get
No.
ready? So you kind of hit pause.
Yeah.
And with that much land, so what'd you do with that next season? Did you let it just sit, or did you try and plant something else? Or
We had contacts, or Jim had contacts with a lot of people over there. So immediately started making contacts. We didn't have crops growing. Some of the crops we were growing for a cover crop, we turned around and harvested, but there's no way it was going to cover it. We had some leases that we got out of because we didn't need so much ground. We had to sell some property in order to,
make ends meet.
the bank supported us through there too, because we had a pretty big debt that we couldn't pay. And then customers. We were a very important part of a lot of customers' business: fertilizer, chemicals, machinery. One company that grew our transplants, they built a whole greenhouse just to support our pepper operation.
Wow.
And that all went away just like that,
Overnight. How long did it take for you personally to come to grips with the fact that, like, after all those years, this huge chunk of your business had just evaporated? Was that something that it took a while, or did you come to grips with it right away and just start planning, okay, how do we fix this? What's next?
My attitude and Jim's attitude, well, we got to move on. It's either declare bankruptcy or figure out what we're going to do. So that's what we started doing: dropping leases, selling land, getting new contracts, getting people to support us. In the August following that separation, David turned around and sued us.
He sued you.
He sued us.
You didn't sue him.
We didn't sue him. There was about $1.5 million that he had overpaid us for the previous crop, and we essentially applied it to work we'd already done. But he wanted that back. He also wanted the equipment, which he had paid for. We had designed, built, operated. So there might have been some dispute over that, but he turned around and sued us. Thank goodness he did. When he sued us, we countersued. That was also a scary time because lawsuits are expensive. Never been through one before in my life. Basically, I had to rely on Sarah Jane, my wife's investments, in order to pay the law firm. They were a tremendous law firm.
You countersued for what, like breach or something like that for them?
Yeah, breach of contract. Yeah.
Okay. And where did that all end up? Did it go to court?
Went to court. Yeah. The preparation for court started in February. We finally went to trial in June, and I think that was 2018.
And when they sue you and you countersue them, is that all one trial?
One trial.
Okay, so it's all one big trial.
Yeah, one big trial.
And it's all going to get hashed out.
Right. When we started prep for that, my attorney said, "You and Jim are mine for the next few months." And that's basically it was. We had to go back through emails and, rebuild history. And, one Sunday night, the attorneys were working until 1 a.m. They didn't just, work on our lawsuit. They were invested with us personally. That all went to trial in June, I think it was 2018. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I was on the stand, Jim was on the stand. We had a unanimous verdict on all 12 counts. And the judge read each one and asked the jury to raise their hands. And they all enthusiastically raised their hands on every single one. So I was in tears.
What was the finding? Tell me.
They awarded $13 million and $10 million in punitive.
So you won
We won
everything.
We won everything.
He lost everything.
And he lost everything.
So basically their finding was essentially he wronged you.
He decided to appeal. He hired a very expensive worldwide law firm to handle the appeal. And so the appeal dragged it on for another 2 years about. In order for him to appeal, he had to put up $35 million. He didn't want to jeopardize his brand, which we were going to take control of, or not control, but that would be, at risk. So he put up the cash. Basically, he had a mountain of cash.
Wow.
So he put up $35 million, and he had to pay 10% interest on the judgment every year that it dragged on.
How long did the appeals process last?
2 years. Basically paid $5 million in extra, plus attorney fees, which were probably a couple $1 million.
And what happened? Did he lose the appeal as well?
He lost. There was a very, I can look it up on my phone because My wife had it framed for me for my birthday, but appellate court finding, what he read in there, was very touching.
Wow. To support you, the farm.
To support me, yeah. To support our farm.
Well, good.
Yeah.
As it should be.
And I'll pull that up and show it to you.
I'd love to see it. I've been through lawsuits before. It's been a long time. Nothing even remotely close to what you're describing. I found it unbelievably emotionally taxing and exhausting. To have to sit on a stand in front of a room full of people, remember things that happened years ago, and some other side's attorney is picking you apart and trying to make you look foolish. I think most business owners I know, something I have found in my experience is people who've never run a business don't understand how much of your heart and soul you have to put in every day. Like if you're not in it 100%, you're not going to succeed. So to do that every day and then have to go try and justify your actions from years ago in front of a bunch of people in a room and have someone try to take you apart, it's unbelievably painful. So for you to go through that with the added pain of the destruction of this relationship and this huge chunk of your business, it had to have been unbelievably stressful. How did you get through that?
It was pretty scary. When I was up on the stand, I was scared to death, really. And Jim, same way. But I think we came across well because we're both very honest, very ethical. And that sat well with the jury. And the jury recognized that Donna and David were lying when they testified about a lot of things. And they said that afterwards because we talked to a lot of the jury members afterwards. My attorney told me in preparation for the trial, he said, yeah, I'd give you a C minus in the way you would testify. But after the trial, he said, you give me an A.
Well done. So as you get through the lawsuit and then the appeals process, that sounds like it's years of grinding through all that. In the meantime, something else sort of happened that God, fate, karma, whatever. It seems like they've gone at Huy Fong through some challenging times because a couple of years later, their product kind of vaporized off shelves, and that was in the news too. I saw it all over the place. You couldn't find it in stores. I mean, even the local, pho place I go to, suddenly you couldn't get sriracha anymore. So I don't know if that's speculation on your part, but what happened? Did he have a supply chain issue after grenading your relationship?
He did not rebuild his supply chain. He counted on getting cheap peppers out of Mexico, which he was able to do for a couple of years. And he got a couple of growers in Northern California to grow for him. One went out of business because David harmed them. Another wouldn't grow for him anymore. One's continued to grow for him, but maybe not so successfully. And then the growers down in Mexico, some of them got hurt in dealing with David, so wouldn't grow for him anymore. And then the price of peppers was so low at the time, and they were shipping so much north, they changed. That dried up. Farmers won't do that forever. And so when that happened, all of a sudden, David ran out of supplies. He flat ran out for a year.
Wow. So his inventory he had built up with you when he pulled the trigger on your deal.
It was gone.
Was vaporized. And
Yep.
You couldn't rebuild the supply chain. And if 90% of the stuff in the bottle is pepper and you can't get peppers, that's a tough spot to be in. So at what point did you guys decide you wanted to go into the hot sauce business?
Well, we made that decision, and I've questioned that decision over the years. A few months after the breakup, we said, we've been growing the peppers, why don't we make the sauce? It was a lot more complicated than we realized. First of all, we had to come up with a recipe, and that was probably the easiest part. We had to come up with a design for the bottle, and we had to go through all the regulatory approvals with the FDA and the state of California. So we had to get a canner's license. Our guys went to school for 2 days, 2-day school, learning what to do about, meeting the requirements for the state. And then, of course, the county, too, has food safety regulations, and, we had to build equipment, build a line.
So you're not using like a co-packer or something. You're making it, packaging it, bottling it, the whole deal.
Yeah, we're basically seed to sauce.
That's a heck of a lift for a company that's used to just growing the fruits and vegetables to suddenly be in the consumer packaged goods business is a totally new thing. Were you able to use your existing internal team by sending them to school, or did you have to bring in outside help?
We used our existing team. We did bring some outside help in ultimately for the food safety regulatory part of it. We've hired some additional people since then to help us out because, as you described, it's a totally different business than we've been used to. When we first decided to introduce it to the market was just before COVID. So trying to get a new product out on the market when, nothing was moving didn't work very well.
Right.
And our initial label, which I still love, it's an under UR label, just didn't quite catch because we were competing in an Asian market. So then we came up with the Dragon brand, which has caught on. So now we sell under the Dragon brand.
And tell us, what's the name of the product?
I guess you'd call it the Dragon brand, but it's Underwood Ranches.
Underwood Ranches sriracha.
Underwood Ranches sriracha.
And it's got the dragon on the logo.
Yeah.
Again, I'm doing this as a fan. I'm not plugging anything other than the fact that I believe in Craig and his company and his product, but it is an excellent sauce. I mean, it is the only thing we buy now, and it tastes fresher and actually has a little bit of sweetness to it. So how did you start? Because, I mean, you can get it on Amazon, I think, now, right? And
yes.
How did you start getting it into major retailers? How was that process?
Well, we've done business with Costco and fresh produce for years. Our goal was to try and get it into Costco, because if we can get it into Costco, that's like a major accomplishment.
I've heard, I've never sold to them, obviously I'm a different type of business, but I've heard their standards for quality are extremely high.
They perform inspections. We pass all their inspections. We do third-party audit. We pass the state's rules, the retailer's rules, and we're able to convince Costco to carry it. So we designed a box to fit their requirements. Currently, we're still in their business center, but we're waiting for the next round with Costco because they seem to do things seasonally.
So what does that mean when you say that you're in their business center? So like, is that online or is that like?
Well, business centers across the country, if you're a business and you want to get, product.
Oh, I see.
And then you go to their business center.
So like restaurants and things like that and buy from them.
Yes.
And then how do consumers find your product? Now, like locally, they can come to a farmer's market, they can come to one of your farm stands. Yeah. And then nationally, can they buy online from you on your website? Do they buy through Amazon? How does that work?
Through Amazon or our website. Getting distribution is really difficult, getting into retailers. So we're working on that. We're hoping we'll be back in Costco. We've been experimenting with Walmart. Wegmans is successfully carrying it on the East Coast. H-E-B has said they want to start with us in Texas. So that's all in the future. It's not nailed down yet.
I spent a lot of time in Texas, and the H-E-B guys, they are dialed in. That is a great company.
It is.
Great culture.
Yeah.
Beautiful stores. They do a really, really good job. And similar to your company, they have this community thing going on where Texans are so loyal to that brand. It's really cool. It's a neat thing that the Butts family has built there. You've gone through all these sort of evolutions with the ag business, with the family farm, this whole hot sauce business. As you look back, well, first, let's just talk about the sriracha for a second. Because it sounds like, there was a couple decades there where it really allowed you to build your whole enterprise on the back of that. And then you went through this legal battle, and now you've launched your own brand. As you look back at that whole arc, what are your takeaways? What did you learn from that? And what do you think of that whole experience? And what would you pass on about that?
I thought a lot about that, and whether I would have done things differently. I don't know how probably I could have, given the culture of Hui Fong and our culture. Should we have signed a contract? Maybe. When we tried to work it out for the future, it wasn't going anywhere trying to get a contract.
Was it all verbal all those years? Was it a handshake deal?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Shouldn't concentrate all your business with one company. And clearly that put us at great risk. We were profitable with them. Whereas ag is typically hard to find areas where you're profitable. And we'd never been, I would say, we tried a lot of different things in fresh vegetables. We had baby carrots, we had the salad mix, we had artichokes. We tried to establish a lot of brands, and I thought our brands were pretty cool. We either didn't have the money, the distribution, none of them ever quite caught.
And what does Underwood Ranches do today? I mean, you do some peppers for your own hot sauce. And then what else are you farming now on that land?
Growing a lot of cannery tomatoes in the valley, growing potatoes there, carrots. We grow a lot of herbs. We grow some Brussels sprouts here in the county. We grow a lot of crops for other people.
How do you describe your leadership style, Craig? Like, I assume you've got back office people running operations and HR and payroll. You're dealing with a lot of consumers coming onto the family farm for U-Pick and kids camps and school tours, but you're also dealing with a lot of, I assume, kind of like laborers working in the field for the commercial side of your business. So you've got a really diverse workforce of a lot of different people coming from different walks of life. When you wake up every day, what are you thinking about, and what kind of leader do you try to be, and how do you manage all that?
I guess I just try and set an example. And over the years, I think I've been pretty lucky in hiring some really good people to run the businesses. Both Jim Roberts on Underwood Ranches and James Barker for Family Farms. They're about 20 years younger than I am. They've done a great job. My daughter, Susanna, does a terrific job in, promoting the farm and, all of the media requirements that we have. I don't know what my style is. It's kind of hard to say. I guess mostly by example.
I like that. Now, what's a normal week for you like? Are you out in the field? Are you in an office? Are you kind of doing a little bit of everything? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, people ask me that. I'm not sure I could really describe it. I try and respond to whatever crisis there is, whether it's securing financing, preparing for, the next year. I try and maintain the culture that we have at both operations.
Well, how would you describe that culture?
At Family Farms, the culture is, welcoming, friendly. I want to make sure that what we do is excellent. A lot of what we do there is done by a lot of farms in the country. I would just say that we try and do it better. And Underwood Ranches, we just try and do a great job of farming.
Where do you think ag is going? It's a tough business. It's always been a tough business. But as you said earlier, it seems like margins are getting thinner, regulations are getting tougher. Everyone I know who has anything to do with the ag business says the same thing, says it's a really, really tough way to make a living. What do you think the future of ag is? Where's this all going?
Well, I think the trend line is going to continue the way it is. The public in general laments what they call manufacturing farms or industrial farms. But what happens is the smaller guy can't do all of this. So they just keep getting gobbled up by bigger and bigger operations that have better financing, that have a better ability to control things. I think if I had to predict, I think water shortages are going to affect worldwide food supplies. And we've converted an awful lot of land to farming that wasn't before. But shortage of water is going to be the main thing. We'll see in California and the country in general, farm labor force is getting older and there aren't enough people coming in. So it's going to be certainly more mechanized. We're all trying to figure out how to do with less labor. On our farming operation, we're doing more and more minimum till because it's expensive to run equipment. The big tractors that we use for ground preparation, it costs just for the tractors, about $60 an hour. Then the fuel to run the tractors, another $35 an hour. Then you have the guy driving the tractor, plus the implements he's pulling. So it's well over $100 an hour to run, to do ground prep. So anytime you can avoid that.
How do you replant without doing the ground prep?
We make beds and we put in drip irrigation because that saves water and also is more efficient for growing the crop. We'll just go in and do a minimum till on top of the bed and work it up and replant it.
I'm curious, and if you don't want to get into this, I totally understand, but has the cannabis thing had any impact on you guys? Because it seems like I'm seeing more of that in California. Is that?
Us? No. And that's a product that doesn't interest me at all. There was a brief period when, the local growers were growing hemp. That just didn't pan out. 1 year there was 3,000 acres. The next year there was practically none.
I remember there was some hoopla in the local news about it, and the neighbors got kind of feisty, and then it just sort of became a non-issue. And I was wondering.
It was a non-issue because a lot of the customers that they were growing for didn't pay.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, shocked. Yeah. Big promises going into it, and they just didn't pan out.
Interesting. Okay. A question I normally ask is what advice you would give to someone who wants to go into your business, but I want to modify it for you. How many kids do you have?
2 daughters.
You have 2 daughters. How many grandkids do you have?
4 grandsons.
I assume this has come up. What do you tell your grandsons? Like, do you want them to go into the farming business? Do they want to go into it? And what do you tell them if they do?
They've been exposed to it their whole lives. So it's pretty much their choice. I don't encourage them, just like our girls. Our girls grew up farming. When I went out irrigating at night, my wife and the girls would go out with me and they would be reading books while I was out changing water. On Sundays, we would go out and after church, check the fields to see what was going on. Sometimes we had to chase people out of the fields who were helping themselves to the crops. They set up their own produce stand with surplus produce for the neighbors on Sundays. They were exposed to it. Susanna has, she works for Family Farms and, does the promotion. Megan has her own business doing book publicity. The grandsons, I don't see any desire on their part to go into farming. So I'd like to see the farm carry on, but that's up to the future generation.
All right, that makes sense. So I do think we're at an interesting moment in history right now, and I don't know if you agree with this or not. I'd love your take, but it seems like with some of the political shifts that are happening, at the very least, there's suddenly a lot of conversation in the mainstream about where your food comes from, what's on your table, the value of eating fresh produce, the value of maybe avoiding some of the processed foods, the farm to table thing. I'm seeing a lot of signs now at farmers markets that say like, we grow what we sell. So it seems like for the first time in a long time, people are at least talking about it. Do you think that that's going to have an impact? Do you think that like maybe people are waking up a little bit and wanting to buy food that's a little more local and hasn't been on a truck coming, or like you said, coming from overseas in a different country? Is that a thing you think that's going to take off, and will it impact the ag business?
I'm not sure the local movement going to make a big difference, because people have come to expect availability of everything all year. And in terms of the supermarkets, availability is the most important thing to them. They don't want to be out of product. That's what you have to gear for. I think there is more interest in what we eat. There's some, I think, unfounded concerns about what we eat. When I started farming, the chemicals we used were pretty nasty. They were carryover from World War II. What we're using today is so superior. A lot of biologicals, stuff that really there's no residue to worry about. People are far better to worry more about what they're eating than what's on the food they're eating. Because, the regulations that we have to comply with for food safety are pretty stringent, both on the water we use and how we operate in the field and how we treat the crops.
You're talking about like organic versus non-organic and things like that.
Right. A lot of people think that organic growers don't spray. That's not true. Many times organic growers are spraying more often than conventional growers because the materials they're using are less effective. But the key is, does what you're using does it harm the environment, and does it persist? And you don't want either of those to happen. There are some materials that are probably better off if we don't use them. Overall, we have a pretty good food system. Now we seem to have an awful lot of food safety issues with recalls of over E. coli and salmonella and all this, but I don't know. Those organisms are in the environment. It's pretty hard to avoid them all the time.
I mean, I don't think that's a new thing, right? People were probably getting E. coli 100 years ago too. There wasn't a 24-hour news network to talk about it. That's interesting. So the name of the show is Only the Strong Survive. And that came from the fact that business is hard. Entrepreneurship is hard. Most businesses fail before they hit the 5-year mark. And my kind of personal sort of motto is make every mistake once. And as I shared with you before we started recording, that is unfortunately, or for better or for worse, how I learn. Is I every year there seems to be a theme of something I screw up, and I go, okay, made that mistake, not going to ever make that mistake again, and I learn from it, and then the next year I make a different mistake and have to learn from that one. It's like Rocky Balboa. You just keep getting knocked down, and as long as you keep getting up, I guess that's the goal. So a question I ask on this show of every guest is, as you think back over your career, what's the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
I guess I'm not very introspective that way, but certainly the most expensive mistakes are the ones you'll learn the most from. Kelly, I don't know. Usually the mistakes have led to something better. Like you say, you learn from it and move on. I don't know if I could pin them down. I've certainly made plenty.
What's your hope for the future of your business? Where do you want it to go? What do you want to see happen in the next few years?
I would like to see the sriracha be successful. We don't have to control the market. We don't even have to have a majority of the market. I'd just like to have our sauce out there in the market because we're clearly producing a really, really good product. And all of the feedback we get from reviews say the same thing. Family farms, I would like to see that continue on indefinitely.
Me too.
I think we're offering something the community needs and appreciates.
You mentioned earlier, as we kind of wrap up, I forgot to touch on this, but you said 2020 was sort of a banner year for family farms. So COVID was kind of transformational. Can you explain a little bit about that? Like what happened there?
We adjusted because we didn't want to close down. We adjusted so people could come out and pick your own. Then because we were outside, the rules relaxed a little bit. The October of that particular season, we didn't have all the activities we usually have in October. It was just you pick pumpkins. We sold more pumpkins that season than we had ever sold. And we didn't plant any more, but somehow we sold more. So it was a banner year for selling pumpkins. And then we decided, you know what, we're normally closed most of December, all of January and February. Why not stay open? So we did, because they could come to visit the farm.
Just wanted to get outside.
They wanted to get outside. And we kind of readjusted the farm so we were able to have pick your own all the time. Before, we had concentrated it in the area out front, but then we moved it to the back and increased the strawberry acreage, and we made it more available for pick your own. People responded, and the ones who came during COVID have continued to come.
That's really cool. And like I said, I think anyone with a family at that time, especially because the schools were all remote learning, which was a whole other debacle, just having an excuse to get outside and do something fun and be in the fresh air, and that happened to us. I mean, we got hooked on it, and we keep coming all the time now because we just like the environment and like what you built. And so I think that was an interesting and a cool way to adapt to a challenge. So this is pretty neat.
Well, when you say only the strong survive, I would say perseverance is one of the keys to success. My dad, when he was in partnership with my uncle, at one point, the bank said, we can't afford to pull a loan on you because, you owe us too much money. So, that was a critical point. In the 80s, it was a really difficult time. So we had to bring in a consultant to help us get us out of our mess at that time. In the 90s, we got involved in a business that was kind of difficult. So, again, the bank put some pressure on us to pay them off. And then the separation with David, that was pretty dramatic as well.
That's a pretty serious blow.
So we've somehow persevered.
I think that the American farmer is an unsung hero. And I think that not enough people really appreciate or recognize how hard you guys work. And like you said, 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night, 4 a.m., loading up the truck and going to the farmer's market. And I think people would do well to think about where the food on their table comes from. And in your case, not only because you're local and you've been a part of our family's life, but also the sriracha thing in itself is so fascinating. So I think it's really admirable what you've done.
Farming is not just an occupation, it's a lifestyle. Because if you don't like the lifestyle, the hours are too long. My wife always wanted me on Sundays to do projects. I didn't want to do projects on Sunday because, for one thing, part of Sunday was work time, but we're out there working all the time, and you involve the family in it all. And that's not a bad thing. Our girls are both smart and successful, and I'm really proud of them.
That's cool. Well, work ethic kind of goes along with that deal. I think it'd be hard to grow up that way and not have a lot of drive. So my compliments to you. So Craig, if people want to find out more about you, your company, the family farms, sriracha, where do they go? What do they do?
For family farms, you can go on our website, and there's an awful lot of information there, and it's not too hard to navigate.
UnderwoodFamilyFarms.com?
Yep. Underwood Ranches, if you want to find out the sriracha story, it's all over the internet. I've looked through it, and there's just pages and pages of stuff about Underwood and Hui Fong.
And you can buy the sauce on Amazon today. And
yes.
And the reviews, by the way, are phenomenal on Amazon, which is a hard nut to crack. And you've got a lot of them. So
yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Dan.
You bet.